I could easily call this video how to have the best team in Idle Heroes, or towards better team building, or if you watch this video, you're going to have a good team. There's lots of different titles I could give this, but ultimately, hopefully, by the end of this video, you feel empowered or at least informed on how to make a good team in Idle Heroes. Because at the end of the day, there's some very simple practices that you can follow when it comes to hero choices, when it comes to artifact choices, when it comes to homeowner choices, that at the end of the day will just allow you to have a more powerful team than other people, assuming they don't follow these same techniques. As well, by understanding what makes a good team, you'll be able to make smart decisions in the game. You'll be able to ask yourself truly whether a hero is actually going to be useful for your account. Even though you may have seen a hero like Tix or MKxJUMP or Waldeck is strong, how are you going to apply them to your account? And do they fit in the framework that you're setting up to enable your team to do well? As well, it'll inform your artifact choices, your sublimation choices, and ultimately, hopefully give you some inspiration for playing the game. Because at the end of the day, all we do when we play Idle Heroes is collect resources and cash them in to get more power, to get rewards like artifacts and sublimation to improve our team. The end goal is to have the best team possible. So how the heck do you achieve that? Well, when people make decisions about their team, there's two ways of thinking about it. Either you can go ahead and decide, I have this hero, what artifact should I put on them? Or I have this artifact, what hero should I give it to? Now, the first way of thinking is much more common in newer players because they think in terms of heroes, not in terms of artifacts. Whereas actually, if you change your mindset to think in terms of artifacts, you'll be able to build a better team. Why is that? Well, if you look at the way the game is designed, only really one of your heroes are going to be powerful, fast, and with a lot of HP. This is going to be your main homeowner hero. So whether it's someone like this Lord of Fear Aspen, Ailamak, Asmodel, it could be Eloise, it could be Mockman. There are so many heroes you could choose that will benefit from your Cloud Island, but ultimately they're a major damage dealer. This is someone who hits the entire opposing team, and therefore you're going to want to give them as much damage as possible. So, Melodic Strings will 100% be the artifact you give that hero. It gives you attack, it gives you holy damage, and it gives you an active skill in round 1, as well as Valiant Music, which massively boosts the overall damage towards the beginning of the fight and slowly deteriorates over time. This is a fantastic artifact, and the reason we tell you to pick up this artifact as your first Splendid artifact is to immediately enable a good damage dealing hero. So step 1 towards better team building is to have a very good damage dealer. Like I said, this hero needs to hit the whole opposing team, at least immediately, or because of one of their abilities. Sword Flash, for example, hits only a single target with her active skill. But if you're able to grant her impeccable flow, that will then allow her to hit the entire opposing team, a much more powerful ability. If you go take a look at someone like Lord of Fear Aspen, if he's able to kill with his active skill, he'll deal damage to all enemies. Fantastic. We want to take advantage of heroes who are able to kill everybody because it means you have a much higher chance of blowing out the opposing team before they kill you. Mockman is another fantastic hero for this reason, and when you upgrade his light slashing, he is more likely to hit more of the team, killing more of them early on. So again, another hero who is able to hit a lot of opponents, and Asmodel the Dauntless even fits into this category as he too can hit everybody, and so can Vulcan. So there's a lot of big bursty damage dealing heroes out there that will absolutely pressure your opponent. But it's not limited to Transcendence heroes, no sir. One of the best burst heroes possible is a Tix. Tix only targets 4 enemies with his attack, but he does a lot of damage for the early game and also offers some disruption, so getting that early active skill from the Melodic Strings can be super powerful. So even heroes like Tix or other heroes that only hit 4 enemies can still fill this role as a burst damage dealer hero. So hopefully, given all this, you've decided on your main damage dealer for your team, who's going to wear your Melodic Strings, and now you need a way to maximize the value of that hero. Well, active skills are the way that you're able to deal a lot of damage to these opponents. So obviously, we want to get as much value out of Melodic Strings as we possibly can, and we want to do as much damage as quickly as we can. So we need to energy feed. Melodic Strings gives us an active skill in round 1, but how can we get one in round 2 or round 3 to quickly put a lot of pressure onto our opponents before Melodic Strings' value wears away? Well, there's 2 key abilities. First of all, you've got Ignis. Her active skill is able to feed energy to someone. You can see 100 energy here, and they gain 40% damage reduction. That's not bad. But even just a 9-star Ignis gains the Eternity of Dragon Soul ability, which also gives 100 energy. So in theory, you could have an Ignis do an active skill in round 1, feeding energy to the hero who's already gone, so that they'll do an active skill in round 2, and maybe she'll die in round 2, so then you'll get an active skill in round 3 as well. Think of all the damage you'll do on your main damage dealer if you pair them with an Ignis. But Ignis isn't the only way to feed energy to a main damage dealer hero. The other option is Demon Bell. Demon Bell is an artifact that will give energy to the hero who wears it, a little bit of attack and a little bit of HP, so that's pretty much good on anybody, but the main thing here is Energy Outburst. If you make this Splendid, you have a 100% chance to increase the energy of all allies by 20 points, so that's everybody, and there's a 50% chance for it to be an extra 10 points as well. If you have 4 heroes all wearing Splendid Demon Bells, they'll continuously energy feed each other, so that they'll keep doing these active skills, which in turn will continuously energy feed your main damage dealer, meaning you get way more active skills than you normally would. So here's the next step in good team building. Ultimately, you will want to have 16 Demon Bells on your account. And if you're a new player, that might sound like a lot, but inevitably you can do this over maybe a few months of playing. With those Demon Bells accumulated, having 16 of them means you can make 4 Splendid Demon Bells, and you will give them to heroes who are good support heroes. So we're wanting heroes who, when they are put on your team, will benefit you. So it could be Ignis like we demonstrated, or it could be someone who synergizes with your particular damage dealer to let them be effective at what you're trying to do. Now, these heroes don't have to be transcendent to be effective. For example, take Rogan. If you're using a burst hero, Rogan is going to give you additional crit damage at the start of the battle, and twice as much if they are an assassin. That added crit damage means that burst from the melodic strings on your main damage dealer is going to deal more damage, especially if you give them a crit attack stone, where you get even more crit damage and a higher chance to critically strike your opponent. Other heroes that come to mind as well are ones that are going to allow your team to maybe focus better the heroes they're going for. In the case of Sword Flash, she'll focus the lowest HP opponent, and she needs to kill them to gain impeccable flow, so that on follow-up active skills, she can hit the entire opposing team. Well, this is where Drake will come into play with defense down on the lowest HP. It removes all their abilities to dodge, strips away their armor, strips away their damage reduction, and makes it more likely that Sword Flash can kill that hero, thus gaining impeccable flow in future rounds, and of course, therefore blowing out the whole opposing team. We're not just looking at heroes, though, that can go ahead and enable your team to do lots of damage. Sometimes just surviving for future rounds can be really important, and therefore we're looking for heroes that can disrupt your opponent. It might be Carrie, who you can see here can steal energy with her energy oscillation, and that reduces the amount of active skills that you're going to have to deal with from the opponents. It could be Amun-Ra, who's giving bubbles to your team through the Guardian Shadow, which will turn any damage you receive into healing instead. We have heroes like Holmes Young, who's able to shapeshift opponents and turn them into doves so they can't really hurt you. And in that matter, there's tons of heroes who have active skills that are able to crowd control opponents and shut them down. So if you're able to in some way benefit your team by running heroes like this, or even running heroes like, let's say, Scarlet Queen Halora, who's able to do Abyssal Corruption, which will further improve your damage, having that energy feed in there, taking advantage of these skills and allowing your team to either remove the abilities of your opponent or improve the damage of your attacking hero, all that adds up to making your main damage dealer much stronger. Now, you might know you have 6 heroes on your team. We've talked about getting 4 Splendid Demon Bells and the Splendid Melodic Strings, which leaves one more Splendid artifact that we'd need to focus on towards building a very standard lineup in Idle Heroes. The final artifact I'd want you to consider is a Ruyi Scepter. Ruyi Scepter improves the speed and HP of a hero as well as their control precision. Control precision increases the chance that your ability to crowd control your opponent, whether that's stun or petrify, horrify or silence, it improves the chance that that hits your opponent. Add to that an improvement called Eye of Insights, which gives you control immunity offset. This even more improves your chance for that crowd control to land by reducing your opponent's control immunity. Even if you have a guaranteed chance to control your opponent, if they've got 30% control immunity, there's a 30% chance that that control doesn't stick. If instead you remove that with 30% control immune, you're still guaranteed to crowd control that opponent. So Ruyi Scepter can be really influential, especially on a team where you've got enough demon bells so that your control hero is continually going off with their crowd control abilities. Key heroes that can take advantage of this for most players are going to be someone like Lord of Fear Aspen, who is able to place Fear Abyssal Gaze on your opponents, completely shutting down the backline. If you go ahead and sublime him, you even get a chance to turn all targets under the effect of Fear Abyssal Gaze with his active skill as well. So there's lots of powerful ways that a Lord of Fear Aspen can utilize a Ruyi Scepter. But he's not the only one. We've already mentioned here that MKxJUMP has this shapeshift ability. Let's focus on that then and give him a Ruyi Scepter with 4 other heroes with demon bells so that we can energy feed not just your damage dealer, but MKxJUMP too, so that he can go off and turn enemies into doves. The cool thing is, if we look back at a hero like Carrie as well, she actually doesn't care. Control immunity is not going to affect her energy oscillation. So this is a soft control that doesn't need Ruyi Scepter, so she can benefit from the demon bell, which gives you even better control, and therefore you can prioritize that Ruyi Scepter on someone that actually is going to need that additional bonus to crowd control. The main hero that we always love to look at in later stages of the game for this is a Starwing Jara. Now, Starwing Jara is very special in that she doesn't just have the ability to petrify opponents, she can freeze them as well with enhanced versions of the normal effects that you can read down here. But more importantly, whenever an ally releases an active skill, she's going to gain energy as well, not just the energy that you'd get from Demon Bell, and she gains a layer of focus, which further improves her control precision and control immunity offset. Now, all of that adds up to this fantastic skill. If you sublime her active, you can read if her energy is greater than or equal to 200, so twice as much as you'd normally need for an active skill. When she releases her active skill, she'll inflict the same control effects one more time to all uncontrolled enemies, giving her 2 opportunities to crowd control the opposing team. This completely wins fights, and in some cases, completely changes your mindset with team building. Because if you can crowd control an opponent, giving a Ruyi Scepter to a Jara means you could potentially be faster than that whole opposing team, shut them down, and they will never move. At that point, Jara becomes your pseudo damage dealer because it doesn't matter how long it takes you to kill the opponent because they're not going to move. So you can just lock them down with Jara and eventually beat them up until there's no opponents left. This is a very common strategy for people who are much later into the game with 5 or 6 or maybe even more Transcendence heroes. But what we can learn from that is that team building will always follow the same principles regardless of the heroes you choose, provided you know the artifacts that you need. You will always want someone with a melodic strings to be your major damage dealer. You will always want 4 splendid demon bells to energy feed that whole team, giving you more damage from that hero wearing melodic strings. And on top of that, you'll want a hero who is a crowd control focused hero who can take advantage of multiple active skills and keep your opponent at bay whilst you're able to do other active skills with your team and go ahead and crush the opponent with high damage. Now, the importance of this Ruyi Scepter control hero is because if at any point your heroes get controlled, you're not going to have that continuous energy coming from the demon bells, so it will disrupt your abilities. So now we're going to be talking about deviations from this standard way of playing, because if only you could go ahead and run those 6 artifacts and you'd beat everything, life would be really easy. But no, there are of course exceptions to the rule that you're also going to need to know. Obviously, focus on getting those 6 artifacts to Splendid first, but we're going to need more than just that. So let's talk about Antler's Cane. Antler's Cane is the antithesis of Melodic Strings. So Melodic Strings gives you lots of damage at the beginning of the fight, while Antler's Cane with Blessing of the Wild slowly increases the damage dealt by the hero who wears it, slowly and progressively stockpiling into huge amounts of damage. If the fight goes on longer than 7 rounds, you will probably want an Antler's Cane more so than a Melodic Strings. You will get so much more damage against puppets like Gluttony, who have tons of health, or boss fights where the goal is to do just as much damage as physically possible. Antler's Cane in these longer fights, provided you can survive an energy feed for multiple active skills over and over again, will always be way better than a Melodic Strings. So it's definitely an artifact to consider picking up once you've established the main 6. On top of that, Golden Crown is an artifact to consider. Now, it's really good for defense. It gives you attack, it gives you HP, and it gives you all damage reduction. Now, remember when we were talking about Demon Bell and saying if your heroes get disrupted, then you're not going to have that continuous energy feed? Well, pretend for a moment that your team is just too slow. This is very common in later stages of the game. Perhaps your heroes wearing Demon Bell die before they even get one active skill off. At that point, there is no reason to have Demon Bell on that hero. In fact, that hero is entirely useless. Perhaps considering something like a Golden Crown, which gives you a lot of all damage reduction and thanks to Deterrence of Majesty even more at the start of the fight, that hero is going to be a lot harder to kill. So being slower than the opponent doesn't prevent you from getting your abilities off. Yes, you don't get the enhanced effect of having a Demon Bell, and that's going to be a little bit upsetting for some of you, but really having a Golden Crown on that frontline hero so they don't just instantly get blown out is going to be super useful. In fact, it's very common in stages of Void Campaign to have 2 splendid Golden Crowns for moments just like that, so that slot 1 and slot 2 can wear this Golden Crown, or even just a hero that isn't your homeowner so they're not going to get instantly killed, and therefore they can stay alive. The nice thing with Golden Crown as well is it stacks with other abilities that improve your damage reduction. So take Freya for example. Whenever an ally releases a basic attack or an active skill, they'll gain damage reduction by 5% and attack by 8%, and that's further increased if you go and improve her sublimation. Now the beautiful thing about Mystic Fairy Freya here, provided your hero is able to just do something, they'll have a ton of protection. As well, her active skill is going to give her an ability of Evolutionary Factor, which then further adds to your damage reduction by 30%, and Sublimed, that's going to become 40% damage reduction. That's huge. I love to use this with heroes that are weaker in later stages of the game. People like Amun-Ra, who can protect me, Olivia, who can shrink opponents and keep me alive. I like to just put a Golden Crown on these heroes so that when finally Freya does do that active skill and my Olivia attacks and my Amun-Ra attack, they have a ton of damage reduction so that even though they are going to be weaker heroes because they're not transcendent, they're still able to hold their own and stick in the fight. And therefore, that's something you want to consider as well when you're team building. It's very easy just to think that you could have 4 Demon Bells, a Ruyi Scepter, and a Melodic Strings, but sometimes there are going to be heroes that just can't live in round 1, and that is when having splendid Golden Crowns, ideally 2 of them, will come into play. Sometimes there are going to be minor cases where Antler's Cane just isn't the artifact you want, and actually you still want early burst damage, but you maybe want to delay your damage dealer so they have time to buff up. Heroes that need a little bit of time to get strong are heroes like Asmodel or Vulcan, and maybe at that point you could even consider getting a Punisher of Immortal. I probably wouldn't lean towards this as an artifact to immediately pick up. I much prefer Antler's Cane because it's much more useful across multiple areas of the game, and most of the time Melodic Strings and Antler's Cane can do the trick. But there are some cases where, for fun, you might want a Punisher of Immortal. In non-team fights, sometimes having a hero who is both quick and defensive can be really useful, especially in Aspen Dungeon or Seal Land, and that's when I'd consider getting an Augustus Magic Ball, and there are going to be fringe uses for artifacts like Lucky Candy Bar, Magic Stone Sword, and even Snowheart to slow down opponents so that you can still have the edge on speed. Heroes like Candy Bar are used to avoid control effects, which can be quite annoying. This is useful in things like Star Expedition and some Seal Lands, and Magic Stone Sword allows your hero to stay alive even if their health is quite low. This can be very useful on damage dealing heroes that might actually benefit from wearing this because they're getting smacked loads and loads and loads and need a bit of time. There are some stages in Void Campaign where Mockman very much appreciates this. And actually, one of the big artifacts that's getting a lot of buzz at the moment is the new artifact, Gilded Purple Fan, because this gives you shields. Now, this is more for when you've got to a point where you're really learning about what your heroes can do, but let's say you have a very specific hero that grants shields to your team. For example, this guy right here, Hyperspace Hunter Ailamak. His passive is going to give shields to your team, which is fantastic, and all of those shields are going to add up to a ton of protection for your team. If you go ahead and combine that with the Gilded Purple Fan, you're going to get a ton of interesting bonuses. You get HP, all damage dealt, crit damage reduction, so that's going to save you from crits, but also you take less damage whilst you have shields, and if you have no shields, you gain more. So it's a really fun artifact in that case, but it's much better for later stages of the game, or at least when you've established yourself with the other artifacts, so that's one to think about as well. Today might feel like a video where I'm just advising you about artifacts, but the thing I want you to take away from this is that team building is artifact focused. Having an energy feed engine with a Ruyi Scepter to control and a damage artifact like Melodic Strings or Antler's Cane is just the fundamental backbone of good team building. You run heroes like Crown to save you from emergency damage, like Lucky Candy Bar to protect you from crowd control. But ultimately, if you follow the principles of energy feed plus high damage plus control equals win, you will be absolutely fine. So when it comes to making decisions about heroes, you don't want to have multiple damage dealers on your team. No, you just want to have one main one focused to deal with opponents, because they can take up all your resources, and it's much better and more efficient for things like promotion stones, gold, and spirit if it's all just funneled into one hero than the wider team. You then make smart choices with 9-star heroes or maybe additional E5s that can support you, maybe later Transcendence heroes that can support as well, to ensure you've got that control and support on your team. That's why when we talk about teams, you'll see there's Sword Flash teams, or Mockman teams, or Asmodel teams. It's very rare that people run multiple damage-dealing Transcendence heroes on their account, and that's another big mistake that early players make, because they don't quite understand that when it comes to team building, you need to entirely focus on one major damage dealer, and that's because you only really can have one hero in a Celestial Island home at a time. It's very, very rare that for the majority of players, you will have 2 fully maxed out Celestial Island homes. If that is the case, then you can be a bit more flexible. But even then, secondary homeowners often are just doing that so that they have better support, or maybe they're faster so that they can control better. And in that case, it doesn't even come down to damage again. It's very rare you'll see someone run 2 damage dealers on their team, even in the late game, and oftentimes they have 3 main homes. And that's just a territory that if you're watching this video, you're probably nowhere near achieving. So for you guys at home, make sure you're focusing on a damage hero with good support, and then make sure there's some crowd control in there to stop disruption from shutting you down. Hopefully you found this useful, and hopefully it's informed the reasons as to why we make the decisions we do. You'll see so much on the internet, people asking, what hero should I have, or what artifact should I build, and people will answer that question without explaining why. Hopefully today has helped you understand why we make the decisions we do, why we build teams the way we do, and how we think about the game as a whole when it comes to putting those perfect 6 heroes on that team and pressing battle. Hopefully you've learned something. I'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe, and of course, happy idling.